Okay, let's go.
All right, cool. So I'm just gonna do an intro to begin with, just like a
Okay, no
little
problem.
intro thing. Okay, so Subnautica Below Zero, the sequel to Subnautica, is an open-world video game by Unknown Worlds Entertainment, released in 2021 of this month for platforms such as Microsoft, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. This first-person perspective survival adventure takes place underwater, 1 year after the era of the Precursors and the destruction of the Aurora deep space vessel. The new adventure involves a woman, Robin, who arrives to planet 4546b to search for clues about a research team that vanished there, including her sister Sam. Whilst collecting resources, constructing tools, building bases, and interacting with the planet's wildlife, Robin's goal is straightforward: to explore and survive in the alien environment, whilst also completing objectives to advance the plot. Unlike Subnautica, Subnautica Below Zero includes land-based areas when venturing into the north of the world. However, is there more to the game that meets the eye? And is the game a step forward from its precursor? To answer these questions tonight, on video and podcast, is a good friend of mine, going under the name of Spike. He is an artist, writer, practicing video game designer, YouTuber, and Twitch streamer. The link to his channel, Spike The Gamer11, his YouTube channel, is in the description. Prior to this interview live stream discussion taking place, Spike has already recorded a full 3 hour long live stream of him playing the game. So the link to that video will also appear in the description too. But for now, sit back and enjoy as we review, analyse, and discuss Subnautica Below Zero. Okay, so you all right, Spike?
Yeah, no, sorry. It's weird hearing you get so serious so suddenly.
well. I like to kick things off with like a introduction thing, just to set out what this discussion and analysis is going to sort of revolve around and things. So yeah, so Spike, you've obviously played the game already. Can you tell me very briefly about what sort of preconceptions you had about the game, what you were expecting, if you thought it might be a step forward from the original Subnautica game? Just a quick just summary of what you thought about the game and everything.
Fair enough. No, what I've been, I was one of the lucky few who saw the original Subnautica
Hmm.
way back in early access. I had only really come popular with it thanks to IGP, who did a lot of videos on it at the time. So from that, I became familiar with the game. Going forward, I then followed Subnautica through its development phase, pre-ordered it while in development, so I actually got to experience that. And then in Below Zero, they didn't do that. Xbox players and console players in general could not get early access to this game. It was only Steam players. So my window for actually exploring and seeing it early access was extremely limited to just videos,
Hmm.
which were a few basic beginning of the stories, which to me was it was a bit hit or miss. It was interesting in the fact that it kept the information hidden, so everything was almost completely new. But it was also quite draining because we then had a complete rework of the story,
Hmm.
because the way they had developed the game originally was then changed. They had one story laid out, then rewrote it to a new story.
That
Due to
is
that,
true.
yeah.
That is very true, and I actually have got a question later on about the story and whether or not it should be revised or anything.
I don't mind that it was revised. The original story itself was, I believe, the one that you actually portrayed in that intro. Because the story now is that Sam's sister, Robin's sister Sam, is now deceased.
Hmm.
The team that was originally here left due to an investigation on Sam's death, and subsequent they had no evidence, so the funding ceased, and they were shipped back home.
Hmm.
Robin, however, found Sam's death suspicious because this is Altera, and let's be honest, corporations in any game are always hella suspicious. she had decided to come over to 4546B to discover and explore and find out the cause of her sister's death, which we later find out in the game was due to Sam's own protectiveness of her people and of her crew. But that'll be going over later, I assume, in the story.
Yes, definitely.
Preconceived notions. The game itself, from what little everyone could see about it at the start, didn't look that impressive. It just looked like another Subnautica game, which we were hoping for. But apart from a few features, it didn't really add anything new. However, that was in the start. Almost instantaneously after they began working on it, the next update to the early access was completely different. New biomes that we had never seen before outside of concept art were added. So much detail was added into the game to make it seem more alive. New creatures, manipulations, characters, everything was just pumped up to the maximum. It became so much more realistic, and we could actually see the development in its entirety and see the game almost at its end. So while it was difficult to get an early idea for these games, it always is, I think Subnautica Below Zero, compared to a lot of other games, came out of its early development and quick change mostly intact. Robin was there, and she was sassy and a boss, and everyone still loved her. Alan was there. He was as flat, monotone, and sarcastic as ever, and everyone still loved him. And the story was always grounded in a way that was engaging, but also engaging, weird, but also realistic. It's a sort of familiarity to the game, engaging. The original Subnautica didn't have. Weird, but also the base Subnautica was about surviving alone in an unfamiliar place, being both bombarded physically by creatures and psychologically. But Subnautica Below Zero, the base almost completely different. It's reviewing the loss of a loved one, grief, how people handle differencing in opinions, how they handle meeting new people, how they handle seeing strange creatures. It's almost a completely different story, and I think because of the way Subnautica works and how Below Zero, especially, the writing in it had furthered those initial themes, it handled them pretty well and came out mostly intact and with very good messages. Contrary to the original, Subnautica Below Zero is not a game about surviving. It's a game about mystery, survival, of course, science fiction, why not? But it's also a game about discovering yourself, accepting loss, and how to handle with grief. And I think a lot of games, especially nowadays, need to find a fine line to handle those subjects well. And Subnautica Below Zero just hit them out the park.
Yeah, I think when I was watching your stream for Subnautica, I found a few elements that I thought were just absolutely flawless. Like they were done very, very well. There were some that I thought there were some elements that hadn't really changed from Subnautica and hadn't really sort of improved Subnautica Below Zero as like a step forward away from Subnautica, and there was maybe one or two elements that I thought was probably a step back from Subnautica. I thought, particularly with elements to do with the story and with some of the characters as well. Shall we go into questions then and just have a look at this game, like one by one, looking at each of the details and each of the points to this game. By the way, before I do, this live stream will be uploaded as a full upload onto my channel and also to Spike The Gamer11's channel. As well as this, we're also going to take the audio from this live stream discussion, and we're also going to upload it as a podcast to Podbean. So I will pop the link, hopefully, down in the description of the YouTube upload video once it's premiered and uploaded live to YouTube, so you can check that out and you can listen to it on the go, so that you can check in to see sort of what we think of the game and sort of what we can sort of say about it as like a step
Yeah.
forward from Subnautica. Shall we talk about the world first of all? The
Yeah, no problem.
world.
Oh, and those of you who are watching live, you can post your comments in the chat. I will see them and will answer them at the very end.
So now the world for me is pretty fascinating, and that is just an understatement. I mean, everything about the world, including those little tiny details like the cracks in the rocks and the plants and the ocean, and in it, what we're seeing now on screen, particularly with the snow and everything, and the way it just sits on the ground and stuff. There is a lot. There is a lot of sort of different places and different things to explore within this world. Like the people who've designed this game, uh, they've definitely succeeded when making this world like a massive, vast stretch of land and stretch of ocean as well. And what I particularly like about the world is, particularly with the oversaturation and detail of the underwater scenery, and this this is like a contrast with the bleak fogginess on land, particularly in the opening few, like the opening scene when Robin gets underwater and when she loses oxygen and stuff underwater and she goes out onto land. There's just this sense of bleakness and it's deserted and everything, and it kind of harks back to what Subnautica, the original Subnautica, was rooting for, which was it's a game about exploration, but it's also a game about exploring the unknown all alone. Like you're this solitary character in this vast stretch of ocean, stretch of land, looking at different creatures, different wildlife, going into different caves and different hidey holes and stuff, and just seeing sort of, you know, the amount of detail and the amount of sort of concentration that the video game designers have put into the environment that you're currently seeing on screen. What do you think of the world and the environment, Spike?
It's sort of a tough one. You can't really do well. It's difficult to do single player games justice, mostly because players like having communication. People are social creatures. We like
Mm,
talking to others, giving their views, just having a chat. So
mm,
playing a single player game, especially when the emphasis of that game is to feel alone, is extremely difficult for some people to actually be able to handle because they tend to get into calls, they don't tend to talk to people and kind of brush the story off because they don't feel that sense of dread.
mm.
Subnautica's world and the way how it works, you can't do that. In the original Subnautica, it was not great. The character was generic white man. Well, I believe he was white. He was either white or Asian. I can't remember. It was one of the two. But it was generic man with strange hair in sci-fi world on alien planet who cannot speak and is alone. And there's not a great deal you can do to really connect a player to a character that is completely mute. Well, no, you can. You can let players project onto them, but Subnautica never really gave you much chance to do that.
Do
Below
you
Zero,
think
however, kicks that in its fucking teeth. You
do you
have character
think
depth.
do you think that could be like a downside to this game, or do you think it's the designers and the people who made this game intended that to be like a an element that is sort of characteristic of the Subnautica series? So this idea of you can't really communicate with the characters very well, and it's all about sort of being this solitary, lonesome figure. just running or swimming around the landscape. Um, so do you think? So do you think it's intentional? This idea of not really connecting with the characters, or do you think it's a matter of a character or story issue?
Uh, it's neither. Good characters are not characters that you can 100% relate to, because those are not characters. They're just pieces of a game or a story that people can project onto safely. A character is a three-dimensional being. They're supposed to feel alive and supposed to have their own opinions and
Hmm.
material, and basically supposed to feel as though they were a real person.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where the original falls flat. You just couldn't do that in the original. The character was, like I said, just a generic man with no real defining features. It was just, here's a man, here's a world, look at him go, look at him survive and talk to weird alien mother. It's,
Hmm.
but Below Zero, like I said, kicks this in the teeth. You can do anything. The characters themselves have a rebuttal and conversations about the tiniest of minuscule things that is such fine detail that they didn't need to add it.
Hmm.
For example, there's this scene either later on where Robin finds her sister's necklace, and immediately you would think that a character would go gung ho and go, I need to destroy the evil corporation that caused my sister's death. And she doesn't. She just reflects on the fact that maybe she didn't know her sister as well as she could. Maybe there were
Hmm.
things her sister was keeping from her that she should have noticed or she felt she should have known. And
Hmm.
then you have Alan, which is the only other voiced character physically with you in the game who reflects with Robin. This is not just a story about Robin and how she relates to Sam. This is a story about how Robin and Alan communicate. It's
Hmm.
less a story focused on Sam's death. Sam's predicament and her subsequent passing is the catalyst to get Robin and Alan to meet and to talk, to
Hmm.
sort of share an implicit, maybe possibly very serious lesson about two people with vastly different ideas, personalities, and uh, yeah, paths, just talking, slowly building up a friendship that,
Hmm.
from as you can tell in the game, just going through it, is really deep. They
Hmm.
trust each other a lot more than what you would ever think you yourself could trust a strange alien creature that was put into your head.
Hmm. I think we
Mm.
are. I think. Well, I think we'll come on to characters a bit. Just one more question about sort of the world and the environment. Um, so Subnautica has this thing where if you're underwater and you're running low on oxygen, you need to go up to the surface in order to get some oxygen. Do you think these switches between underwater and being on land can be very misleading, or can it confuse the people playing the game? This whole oxygen thing of constantly going up out of the water onto land and then back into water and then it repeats over and over again. Or do you think
Like,
it's
well,
there's an advantage for that being in a game like Subnautica or Subnautica Below Zero?
there's an advantage to it in Subnautica, especially in Below Zero, because as you had stated, the original just didn't have pockets of land. It had, I believe, three total areas
Hmm.
that were above water level. That was the floating island, the gun island, and the Aurora. That was it.
I
So
guess that's what you
trying to
expect though.
judge,
I guess that's what you expect though from from something like Subnautica Below Zero, because the original Subnautica was so successful that the designers and the people making and writing the story and making the world and designing the visuals and stuff are thinking, well, hey, why don't we give the players more of an option to make that game just that one step better and more sort of opens up more options and more sort of insight into the world around Robin by
It's because
introducing
it
more land-based stuff.
it's because it doesn't. The original Subnautica takes place in a volcanic crater
Mm,
that the crew just happened to land in. There was no rhyme or reason, and as far as we could tell, though, it just happened on complete accident and by luck. Where Robin is the complete Arctic.
mm,
It's an area where there is land because it's the Arctic. There are frozen elements. Whatever land was there was frozen over. Ice must dominate the landscape.
mm,
So while the landscape in Subnautica Below Zero is way farther and more advanced than it ever was in the original, it's also more boring. I know that sounds like a massive sort of contradiction. Well, if there's more land, there are more biomes, it means it must be more interesting, but it's not. The surface land in Below Zero is just a cold, desolate waste. There are snow stalkers and ice worms and creatures that you can just tell are reaching their breaking point. The ice worms exclusively can only hunt the snow stalkers, and the snow stalkers themselves live off of the few penguins they can manage to scrounge together.
mm,
It's an ecosystem that's falling apart. There's just not enough survivability on land anymore. Compare that to the sea life in the game, which is flourishing. There are so many unique and incredible biomes in Subnautica, almost exclusively underwater, because that's where life can truly sustain itself in this world. It's a planet almost entirely made of water, and so they had to find a way to make that interesting. And when you're stuck out of land, the only way you can do is by making ecosystems that you would never think would work. I
mm,
mean, look at the crash site in the original Subnautica. It's a barren wasteland because of the aurora, but sand sharks, parasites based life forms, and a leviathan class can all survive there regardless of that massive interruption to their ecosystem
mm,
because it was barren long before anything else arrived. But they get sources of food from the other biomes around them. Wherever you can find a Reaper, there is almost exclusively a flourishing life biome right next to it, almost hinting at yes, Leviathans live in this desolate, empty wasteland, but they're hunters. They'll go out and find their food regardless of where it is.
mm,
Below Zero, however, is almost completely well. Below Zero plays a very funny trick in game development. Well, just development in general. It makes you think it's bigger than it really is. In the original Subnautica, there are, I want to say, about 10 to 15 biomes. Uh, you would think that's a lot, but each biome is broken up by separating into other biomes and then having different areas where these biomes overlap. There are two
mm,
entrances to the Blood Kelp that lead both to the Grand Reef and then to the Lava Zone. There are three safe shallows reflected by three different grassy plateaus and three different kelp forests. But all of them are designed that you could easily get confused about which one is which because they're so
mm,
different but so similar. Below Zero just doesn't have that. The game itself doesn't take place on such a deep location. The deepest you can go are the Red Beryl Caves, which are almost directly next to and not much deeper than the Purple Caves that you see later in the game.
mm,
Com- uh, Most of the biomes are taken up on the land. In fact, the entrance to both of the two deepest locations, can only be entered in one biome, the lily pads. The lily pads itself is probably the biggest biome in the game, taking up almost the entire end of the map. But every other biome, the lands, there are only two biomes on this massive land area with nothing in them other than a few wrecks and one base each. The game itself feels bigger because there's so much more to see in these small biomes, but there are less biomes to explore, so the game feels bigger than it is. The world of Subnautica is fascinating because not only is it completely imaginary, meaning we have to create it in our imagination, there's no way to really tell if this was inspired by reality. But the creators have made it in such a way that even though it's imaginary and even though we have to look at it through a game lens, it's so full of diversity and there's so much chance to have so many different ways of exploring it. An Arctic biome has completely different biomes to that of a volcanic crater, but both feel similar enough that you can tell these are from the same planet. You have similar species, Arctic variants of creatures we know from the base game to help older players from the original Subnautica adapt much quicker compared to the new players, learning this all on the fly, as you would expect.
Yeah, I have to agree about the diversity of the environment, particularly with the plants, the different textures of the land and everything, the snow, the rocks that I've mentioned earlier, particularly in some of the caves, in the hidey holes and everything. The lighting as well. The lighting is just. Shall we just go on to visuals for a second? Now that we've got some very interesting examples of lighting going on here, particularly with the sky, the moon, the plants in the water. Let's just talk about the visuals and the lighting,
Yeah.
for just a moment. So I'm obviously not a video game designer, but I do think that the visuals are stunningly very good, particularly in daylight when the natural light streaks, when the sort of the sunlight streaks just fall across the surface of the water. I've mentioned that the textures are incredibly realistic, but I think it somewhat keeps the same sort of lighting that you might find in Subnautica. I don't think the lighting and the visuals really have changed from Subnautica. It's basically just a case of the video game design is just maintaining um, the strict, like, little tiny details, like the little streaks across the water, the plants, the the torch lighting, sort of the sky as well. But what do you think about the lighting? Do you think it's bad that the lighting hasn't changed since Subnautica, or do you think it has? Do you take a completely different view about the lighting?
Well, it's less of the lighting has changed and more of the the rendering has changed. The way the light is seen in the game. You can tell this from their early development because I believe, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, the developers completely changed their um, engine. They went
Mm.
from one engine to, I believe, Unreal, which the Unreal engine, you can tell, is a lot more different just on the fact of how it handles its lighting. Oh, sorry. The Unreal Engine is much brighter than most other game engines because just due to how they develop it. The rendering of the light in Unreal is almost always baked, meaning that textures have their lighting put onto their texture. That's just how the game likes to make itself. And you can sort of see this in Subnautica, where lighting itself, certain elements will stay lit regardless of the light quality. That's not a problem, mind you. It makes it far easier to be able to see key moments and key elements.
Mm.
For example, I like how all of the precursor tech has a nice green hue around it. The lighting in those areas follows this sort of green alien sort of appearance and have very few areas to really catch your eye. If you contrast this to the human lighting, however, you'll find it's a lot more blue tones or orange. It's standard lighting we would like to find. The game itself relies heavily on its lighting to guide the player in certain elements. Certain biomes are so incredibly dark, but are only lit by those few key elements you can see just prodding out every now and again. That's what really draws you in and what helps to make the game stand out. The art style, the lighting, all of them are just key elements that help to draw you through the world at your own pace. You don't have to follow the lights, you just choose to because it's interesting. You see these broken lights or these lights flickering. You see a single light on in a wreckage and you assume, oh cool, that's weird, I'm going to go and look at that. And it helps draw you to those key elements that could have resources you need, blueprints that required or could just help you, or PDAs that give you the extra information that you would otherwise be missing.
So do you think lighting helps the players to move the story on? Do you think lighting plays a huge role in guiding the player to the story? Or do you think the lighting can be part of the story as well? So, for example, different sorts of lighting complement different moods or different sort of like moods and feelings that are going on sort of in different scenes of the game. Do you
It
think
definitely
that...
helps certain moods. You get this sort of overwhelming feeling in the precursor spaces of, this is not normal, this is not human, this is something out otherworldly. And it's just due to that sort of green hue that you see that turns on as you approach, almost as though it's been off for centuries, and suddenly it recognizes something that it can activate for. You see this in the way that the human lighting is almost entirely on key elements that otherwise we wouldn't see. You wouldn't expect to see a brightly lit or an underlit room. You'd expect it to have shades of grey, of different colours. You'd expect the world to be darker than it is. But it doesn't. Subnautica is a very bright game. It likes players to look around, to see the landscape, to see how the sun and the moon travel, to really get a grasp of this whole world and just understand how big it is. And they use the lighting for that very well. Every creature in Below Zero has some form of bioluminescence. It's what you would expect. Creatures in ice tend to glow to help them find their way in the dark. The plants have a form of bioluminescence. Even the crystals in the darkest area glow. Everything in this game emits a light to help you see where you are and to help you establish just that this place is bright. There is light everywhere and you don't need to make it yourself.
Suppose, though, that Subnautica Below Zero was the entire game was just situated in just one environment. So, for example, just one underwater basement of some sort. Do you think the game would have more success, the same amount of success, or would success drop if the game was situated in just one setting? Or do you think Subnautica Below Zero and Subnautica is a game that's supposed to be this open world? Like, if you want to look at a vast expanse of world, would it be good for the player to just have them just situated in one room and just to see it from the outside world and the outside perspective and making them want to go and explore different parts of that world? Or do you think it's best for the player to just be set loose into a vast expanse of land with all this crazy contrasts and different variations in lighting?
The only way they could have fucked Subnautica Below Zero up in that regard is if they made it restrictive. A game like Subnautica, and especially Below Zero, just won't work if the player is not allowed to explore. The
Hmm.
game relies on you being able to look around, try new things, explore new areas, find new secrets, and that's how it tells its story. It wants the player to walk around and to see all of the little nuances they hide throughout the whole game to
Hmm.
really tell a story. This is shown in Below Zero by how you find the gassy bases. They're
Hmm.
completely pointless. They don't add to the current player's story, but they're part of the world and tell you how dangerous the Corral bacteria is. It helps realize just how bleak this world is, how dangerous it can be, and just helps point out how much of shit the player is in if they don't get out. Contrast that to Below Zero. The world is almost completely friendly. There aren't many areas where you really have a chance of dying. The world itself just won't let you. There are biomes designed to just help you find your way
Hmm.
and help you survive. There are these small facets where you can find so much food anywhere that you're likely never to run out. But the game wouldn't be like that if you couldn't explore these areas. If you were given a path, go A to B, it's just boring because without anything actually driving you there, it's just you being
Hmm.
told and having no stake in it. The way Subnautica works is by pulling the player into the story. It makes you imagine yourself as the character, or just bring you along for the character's journey. You want to see these people survive, you want to see them make their way out, and that's what makes the game great. Being able to go and explore, find little ways to hide, little areas where you can get more resources, mark out areas that are more dangerous than not, find these ever elusive engrams that could or could not help you on your path. It's all pointless. They could have just given you everything right from the start, but it's nice rewards for taking the time to explore the world, to try and understand it, and to learn about its mysteries.
Hmm.
Below Zero has an incredible story following the Mercury 2 crew. Sorry.
Shall we go on to the story then? Considering you're already sort of onto that particular point.
It's difficult to explain anything without talking about the story because
Hmm.
everything is almost dictated by it.
That is very true to an extent. Yeah. Um. So
Go on.
story wise, just looking, just watching your 3 hour long stream of the game and sort of reading around sort of the story of this game and looking at certain comments and things and just getting a bit of a broader understanding as to the story behind Subnautica Below Zero. I'm I'm very on the fence about the story, if I'm going to be honest. Um, so previously, I talked about um, the fact that Subnautica, one of the main things, probably the primary reason as to why Subnautica was such a huge success as a video game, it was because of this feeling of loneliness. And because of this feeling of loneliness, as you said, if a character's just situated just all alone in this vast stretch of landscape, they have numerous amount of options that they can explore, and it helps them to just sort of they see something in the distance, and that makes them want to go. Oh, I'm going to explore that particular cave, or oh, I'm going to go up above the surface of the water to see sort of what appears on land or what that strange blue green light is or whatever it is. Um, but in terms of the story, I think the story completely sort of in Below Zero completely diverges away from the loneliness that launched the success of Subnautica. Um, I think when you actually look at the game and actually look at the story, and this will probably sound contra completely contradictory to what I previously said about this idea of feeling lonely and stuff. If you were actually to look at it in terms of Robin and Robin's situation, and the position Robin is underwater or on land or just in the game in general, she's not really that lonely. Um, she does have a lot of contact with quite a few characters in the game, particularly contact on the phone. For example, there's an assignment that she has to complete for somebody to disable one of the control rooms in one of the towers in the later on into the game. Um, Having said that, do you think the story and I also know that the story has had a completely different team of writers working on the story, a completely different group of writers to that of Subnautica, the original. So, do you think the story is deserving of a revision by the writers because of this absence of loneliness was that made Subnautica popular as a game, as a type of game?
I
Or do
mean,
you?
well, let's dispel the falsities. It wasn't the fact that Subnautica was about being alone. That was just part of the story. The original Subnautica story was just one of helplessness.
Hmm.
You're stranded, you have to get out, you're just happen to be the last one alive and you don't even know it. It's really just a game designed to make you survive, to trigger those fight or flight, those survival instincts in a player. Below Zero doesn't have that because, well, you already know you can survive. You're going to make it out. This is a video game, and Subnautica Below Zero plays itself of, yeah, you aren't alone,
But do
but
you
you're not
think?
exactly in company.
But do you think this idea of being alone allows writers more of a freedom to come up with different, unique sort of underlying plot lines and things that could help players be drawn into the game?
Hmm. I mean, no, not really. Any story can work so long as it's engaging. A
Hmm.
story about being hopelessly alone is gonna grate on people very quickly because there's not a lot you can do to that to make it complicated or interesting. Subnautica worked because it wasn't meant to make you feel alone. It just happened that way.
Hmm.
You were the last one of your crew, and the game itself is designed to be a psychological horror. It plays on your fears of being alone. It makes you wonder about all the little things that you're seeing. Was there movement? If that was, what was it? Was it something small that couldn't hurt you? Was it something big that is sneaking up on you? What's that giant sound you can hear? It
Hmm.
all plays into this theme of never truly being alone and never truly being with company. It's designed to make you think that you have people with you. You're not going to be alone. You have others you can save and be the good guy. But Subnautica, the original, is very melancholic. It doesn't tell you you can save everyone or you can't save everyone. It's just kind of teaching you, yeah, sometimes you'll be alone. Sometimes other people will just be gone. And regardless of your personal feelings on that, you need to get out of danger. There is no other chance. You have to run. Whereas Below Zero doesn't follow that same idea. It's a game that isn't following the whole you are alone, you must survive. It's a game that's more following in you have a friend or someone who you want to help, either for your own benefit or theirs, and you just need to find a way to get the pieces to make it to work. And along the way, you see this in how Alan and Robin respond to one another. At the start, they're very well distant. They don't know each other. They don't believe each other. They're cautious. They don't have trust. But as the story goes on, you see them learn. You see them develop a relationship. They become friends. Alan trusts Sam just as much as Sam trusts Alan.
There is a
They
line from the intro though when they're having a conversation. The intro, by the way, I thought was very good. Um, um, there is a line that Alan did say to Robin, which was "I'm going to miss you, Robin," and there was sort of an element of connection between the two characters. Though it's basically just based on how, I guess, how the players can interpret the characters and sort of come to terms with what an engaging story means to them.
Hmm.
Because the trying to create an engaging story is one thing, but to create an engaging story that suits a particular genre or a particular atmosphere, like Subnautica Below Zero, this idea that you're underwater, just alone on a mission, and this idea that you have several tasks that you have to do to try and figure out a particular thing. Basically, this idea of loneliness and adding the theme of loneliness into the story is basically the writers just saying to the players, okay, this game is about you. It's your responsibility. It's under your command, and it's under your sort of responsibility that you should sort of go out and complete all these tasks to find this particular research team and stuff. So yeah, I think the story is, and as I've already mentioned, I have read some of the comments and some of the reviews about this game, and a lot of people was there was a massive debate forum going on one of the Subnautica Below Zero pages about the storyline and whether it should be revised or not, whether the whether it should maintain the loneliness that once appeared in Subnautica to help the writers to come up with different sort of plot lines and different sort of stories and different sort of paths and alleyways to sort of like to make the game more interesting and to make the character more sort of busy and on their toes and sort of looking around the environment? Or do they think that this theme of loneliness doesn't really matter at all, and it doesn't really define the story as engaging as such? It's just more so a mood, and it's this idea that, you know, whether you're alone or you have company, you've still got some stuff that you need to do, and there are important things that you need to find out about um, characters' pasts and characters themselves as characters in the game. Um, so leading on from that, let's just look at the characters very briefly. The characters into this game, and we can also look at some of the creatures as well and the creature design and stuff. But in terms of the actual characters like Robin and Sam and everything else, um, there is I have a bit of an issue with the characters, a bit like
Okay.
with the storyline about the characters. Yeah, I think I think the problem with games like Subnautica Below Zero is that I think this is more of a game that's more concerned with the design aspect more so than the stories and the character. This is probably going to sound a bit sort of. This might shake up the creative industries a bit when I say this, but I don't know enough about the characters to actually learn to love them or to appreciate them as characters in a game. I think the one issue that writers have when they're, and it's not just in video games, I've seen this in film and in theatre and in to a certain extent music as well, particularly when you're writing music inspired by characters, or when they're writing music to suit the personality and the description or the appearance of a character. Um, the 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 writers and the people creating the story or the characters or describing the characters or story or whatever, they have a tendency to normally define characters through the story and not through the actual personality of the characters. So when you were talking about Robin as a character, when we were discussing this idea of Robin being all alone and lonely in this vast expanse of land, expanse of ocean, you mentioned that there was the relationship between Robin and Sam, which helps define Robin and add more depth to Robin's character, Robin's relationship with Alan, Robin's
Yeah.
relationship with her surroundings and stuff. But I'd say that's more to do with the story and less to do with the personality of Robin as a character. There's not very much I can say about Robin as a memorable character. Like she doesn't scream like a massive personality, somebody with interests or dislikes or anything. It's mainly when we think of Robin, we mainly think of the story and her relationships with characters. We don't actually see Robin for Robin. And like I said, I think that's one of the issues as to why writing seems to be heavily sort of concentrated on the moods, the emotions, and the designs of the story, and less to do with like the actual people involved and their personalities and everything. So my question about the characters to you is basically similar to the question that I had about the story. Do you think the writer should improve on character creation and make this game more balanced so that so there's concentration on design and sort of having everything look good and look realistic and look sort of, have the emotions very realistic and everything, and also at the same time have the characters and their personalities on exactly the same level as them? Or do you
I
think
mean,
the characters are, or do you have a completely different view on the characters? Do you think the characters are actually well created by the writers?
my view of what you just said is, where did you find this information? Because I just want to talk. Uh, because I don't get where you're coming from with there isn't a lot to Robin. There, getting a lot of people, especially online, like to go on and on and on ad nauseum about how we must know everything about a character, their backstory, their thoughts and feelings, and we don't. We just flat out don't. That's just a straight up wrong fucking accusation, and you're an idiot for thinking that. What you need to know about a character is what is required for the story. Characters are supposed to feel three-dimensional. They have thoughts and feelings, and they follow with that. But people in real life don't work that way. You can tell a lot about Robin going through the story because that's where you find that information. She uses the grief about Sam, and her mind goes to food. She uses that as a coping mechanism to help her deal with her grief and her loss. You find she's quite snarky with Alan at the beginning because, well, of fucking course, he just entered her mind without permission. But as you go on, you see her slowly develop this trust for Alan that you don't really think would be deserved or should be earned, but she does. She's, and this is only fueled by the fact that she's a scientist. She's curious about these otherworldly beings that no one has ever seen. She wants to know more about Alan, and so goes along with him, works with him because she wants to help him and learns to develop a friendship with him, but is also still just as interested in everything that's going on, regardless of the situation. You see Alan at the start display absolutely no interest in emotions or anything that wouldn't help him be logical and what the architects are, but you slowly see him break his shell. He opens up a lot more about his past, his people. He willingly talks about the atrocities he committed on complete accident, and he shows open regret for it. Alan is not like what we believed architects to be. He's not just an emotionless robot. Through his journey with Sam, he develops these feelings, understands them, and then brings himself to show them. Sam, on the other hand, almost doesn't need to have an arc. She already is a complete person. Her sister is gone, and that's her motivation. She wants to find out what happened. You don't need anything more than that. It's simple, direct, and it's extremely personal. It's a story anyone could have been in, but it just so happened to be Robin. She had the goal to say, I don't fucking believe you. I'm finding this out for myself, and decide and just went with it. Anyone who has lost someone wants to know what happened, but most of the time it's kept to more realistic things. Someone has been killed, they've died of old age, illness, disease, possible drug overdose, suicide. There are so many ways for that to be explored, but Below Zero explores a very different kind of death and a different kind of grief that we normally don't see. So, what would you do if your family, who you believe to be kind, died for what they believed in, and you were told that they died because they were an idiot? It speaks volume of Robin's character that she wants and has to know the truth. She just can't let herself live with the lie that her sister just was just stupid, that it was her own fault, despite it being Sam's own fault. She follows out her sister's work. She does it in her memory and moves forward with her life. She accepts that her sister is never coming back, despite needing her and feeling as though she's lost something, but continues to go forward anyway. It's honestly quite inspiring. Every character in this game that you actually interact with has a sort of arc that you don't really see. Even Maida, you see Maida start out as this really untrusting and really self-contained person due to the events that brought her here. But going forward, you see that she opens up to Robin. She opened up to Sam once they proved themselves to her and actively talked to them. She, Maida and Alan gave a little bit of sass, but well, that's just how people behave. They throw conniptions. They have little things to say, and what makes every character in this game really enjoyable for me. I like characters that aren't just mute, androgynous plaster faces for a player to project onto. I like having a character with their own voice and personality who looks at the story and goes, "What the fuck?" along with me. I find those kind of characters just far more engaging than a character who sees something stupid going on, stays monotone and flat-faced, and then goes, "I'm gonna go and kill the thing." It's just not interesting anymore. It's been done too often. We need more stories sort of like Subnautica, where the characters are just weird. They don't have to make sense. They just have to be. Some people will resonate and go, "That's a really believable person," and other people will just go, "I just want," and some people will just resonate with the characters going, "I don't really care about the story. I'm just along with it because Robin is a treat, and I want to see her find the truth and join her on that journey." It's the way a lot of books work. You aren't physically there, you can't see what's going on, but you get attached to these characters and you want to follow them on whatever journey they're going on. So I think that's the beauty of Below Zero.
So in that case then, do you think people are more likely to connect to a character like Robin through the storyline more so than her personality? Or do you think the storyline has already embedded Robin's personality within the plot?
It's already embedded itself in. There are two options you can take going through the story to find out more about Robin. You can either go forward. Meet him. You can either go forward and answer none of Alan's messages. And let's see none of her little cutscenes when she finds an item about Sam, and see absolutely none of the cutscenes. You can ignore all of it and just skip it. Or you can do what any reasonable person who is interested in these characters can do, and actually watch that shit. Because you see in the subtle ways the animators and the developers have made Robin move. As we had seen on my stream, there's a moment where she finds a picture of Robin herself and her cat in Sam's room, and she sits down on the bed and takes it slowly, almost as though she's coming with the terms that this is something her sister kept, that she didn't need to. That even though they hadn't talked for a while, they were still close. her sister still thought of her often and fondly. And it's small moments like that, like when Robin is explaining hope to Alan, where she explains it in such a small, meaningful way that is less, oh, hope is just something you have to help you get through a difficult time. And she more so explains it as hope is something that you have that simply helps you go forward to the next problem that you need to face. And it's a very, and it speaks volumes for not only how Alan behaves, but how Robin impacts on other people around her and how she impacts on herself. Robin is a very emotional character. You see her go through grief at her sister. You see her try to find out the truth because she can't accept that loss. You see her small interactions with Alan explaining things that, to be honest, I know I'm coming from anecdotal evidence with this, but watching Alan and Robin's interactions were really reminiscent of my own interactions with my family. I don't pick up on social cues very well. I have to have them explained to me if I don't understand them. And unfortunately, in most systems nowadays, we just don't do that. So it spoke quite volumes to me seeing Alan not understand these social cues and aspects, seeing something as it is, asking about it, and then instead of Robin telling him that he shouldn't ask or expecting him to have already understood that, she fully respects Alan has no idea what this social cue is or what this idea is, and explains it in a very practical way. And I think that not only speaks volume for Robin, but of Alan as well, because Robin seems to be very caring to creatures and people she has never met before. She doesn't owe it to Mida to to stop the satellite going over and finding them. She doesn't owe it to her to visit her greenhouse. Robin could have broken into the greenhouse when she found it on her own, or could have very well just walked past Mida, or just done a number of horrible things to get her way. But she doesn't. She listens to Mida's request and fully accepts that she needs Mida to trust her, and so takes the time to help Mida and learn about her. The same with Alan. Alan is very closed off and does not want to be seen, and only actually messages Robin out of a necessity to survive. But after that, Robin holds no ill will towards them. She's annoyed at the start and completely freaked out, as I think is perfectly reasonable for anyone. But after that, she doesn't have to help Alan. She can just keep him in her head, or better yet, she can just simply tell him to fuck off and just not have anything with them. But she doesn't. She helps Alan find his way out of her head. She discovers more about him and explains these concepts that she really doesn't have to. It's these subtle things that really make characters and the world around feel alive. It feels like you're not just playing a part of a game, you're watching a story unfold and just joining for the ride. You're the reason why these characters have the items they do, or why the story is progressing how it is, but it would have progressed. It feels like even if you weren't there, it would have occurred in this manner anyway. It's just you had to be included.
I guess that's true. I guess when it comes to characters and creating characters, it all depends on what idiom you're working in. So with something like video game design, where it's heavily focused not just on the story, but you've also got the visuals and the landscape around you to sort of play and experiment with and stuff. Whereas in complete contrast to that, something like theatre, whereby unless you're doing a production that involves a very complicated set, it's usually the set is acted out on stage as like in its mind and everything. It's not really something like theatre isn't really that much of a visual sort of idiom, whereas video game design is more so a visual type of type of art that focuses on landscape and characters and lighting and everything visual and everything.
Yeah.
I suppose the main reason why I brought up this idea of we don't really know much about the character is because having experienced with something like theatre, if we were to take something, let's say we were to take Robin's story, and instead of putting it into video game, we put it into a theatre performance, so a live action, dramatized theatre performance.
I mean,
Um,
that would just be fucking horrible. I
it
mean,
would
regardless of the
it
stigma that video game movies and theatres are fucking dreadful anyway, uh, it's you can't do that. You can't just. I mean, hell, we don't even do that with stories. Books made movie adaptations still change a good portion of things. Things are cut. I think characters are changed. Certain motivations and scenes are just flat out not there. It's because the way these things are created are in their certain media. You can't just make a video game a movie and have it and expect it to do just as well because it wasn't made with movie ideas in mind. You can't transfer Subnautica into a stage play or a movie or a TV show without basically having to make a whole new story because the ones that are already there just aren't designed for it.
but
And
suppose But suppose, but suppose it was. No matter how good or how terrible it is. Let's say Subnautica Below Zero was turned for some reason into a theatre performance. Uh, I think because it's theatre and it's more associated with this whole idea of theatre is about drawing audiences in and making a performance or a play that means something to the audience so that they see like characters or situations sort of play out on the stage and it's literally like right in front of them, like right in front of their very eyes. It's not sort of animated and well designed on the screen. If they were to look at like even though it is sort of fantasized whereby loads of actors and actresses um, are play certain roles and situations are devised by sort of writers and everything. It's this idea that audience can look at theatre performances and kind of relate that to what's going on in their own particular sort of lives, even though it's a different situation, different scenario, different world created by the playwright, or um, a different setting, different scenario, different types of characters, and everything. It they like to take sort of like the morals, the messages, the emotions, the moods that occur on stage, and kind of apply it to their own lives. And with something like characters, when we're looking at characters in a theatrical context, the audience comes to sort of to learn to love and to understand and to remember and to have emotional connections with the characters. And the one way that they can connect with characters in a theatrical context is if they sort of understand sort of the character's personality, like who they are as people, what they like, what they don't like, what they're very good at, what they're not very good at, what their goals are, and everything. And kind of just have that played out in a story or a situation or a scenario whereby that character has different sorts of and very complex relationships with different characters on the stage. Whereas with something like video games, where everything's played out on a screen and everything's well designed and well animated, um, in order to get that, in order to get people to sort of relate to what's going on and everything, they have to focus on particularly with games like Subnautica Below Zero, where everything is first person perspective. Like you're literally playing as the character, exploring, swimming around the ocean, going on land, and everything. The way that audiences can emotionally connect with what's happening on screen is if the video game was to concentrate itself on on the background, on the visuals, on the lighting and everything, so that they can try and make it as realistic as possible. So then the people playing the game or the people viewing the game can sort of feel as though they're part of this scenario. And when they feel part of something, they tend to kind of take bits of what's going on around them, both visually and story wise, and sort of apply it to their own lives. And with this whole idea of characters and stuff, with something like video games, sort of the characters literally just already explained within the story and within their interactions with the environment. Whereas with something like theatre, when you're like actually seeing the characters in real life, in real person, in like on stage, like right in front of their very eyes, like they want to try and know more about them as characters, not just in terms of the story, but in terms of their personality and sort of what types of people there are on the stage. So I think in terms of characters and story and trying to decide what's engaging, what's interesting, how we emotionally connect with characters and everything, it largely depends on the idiom, what sort of media you're working in. And I think with
Hmm.
something like video games, having a concentration on visuals and story and everything, and making it as realistic as possible, even though it's on a screen for viewers of the game and players of the game to just look at and to just admire, um, having them sort of interact and actually participate in the story, because that's another reason that differs video games from something like theatre, is because in video games, like you can actually like the players actually control and actually can be part of the scenario, like they're actually like they're not watching a character, they're being the character in the game. So in that regard, they tend to relate to that character a lot more. Whereas if it's on theatre on stage and the characters are well crafted with interesting, intricate, and unique personalities and everything, then they also tend to relate to that character more too, as if they're a real life person with interests and goals and dislikes and everything. So yeah, I think overall it's largely dependent on the idiom. But do you have any final thoughts or any further comments about characters and character creation?
Well, I mean, the whole argument about whether a character should be relatable or not is it's silver tongue. A lot of people like to go on that a character has to be three-dimensional. You need to know everything about them, and they must be someone that they play that some another that you can root for, and that's just not true. I mean, look at Macbeth. You know nothing about uh, the actual character Macbeth, other than he was uh, sorry, other than he was a nobleman who went to a bunch of witches. They told him, "Hey, you're going to be king." So he went. So he decided to tell his wife, and his wife said, "Yeah, let's murder the king." And so they did, and it's a slow story about watching this really well-mannered noble man and his wife sink further and further into complete fucking insanity, and it doesn't matter. You feel for them regardless of whether you know everything about them. It's
Hmm.
just the case of people like to say that characters need to be able to root for, and you need to be able to completely look at a character and decide that that character is good, and you must follow them on their journey, and that you need to know everything about them. And that's just not true. The best characters in any story and in any medium are not characters that you can root for or that you have to know everything about. They're characters that make you invested in them personally.
Hmm.
An example of this from a video game is Sylvanas from World of Warcraft. Sylvanas' story is one of betrayal, abuse, rape, monstrosity, and horrendous actions taken against her.
Hmm.
But she's one of the most popular characters in World of Warcraft, far outnumbered, far outnumbering every other character because she's ruthless, cold-eyed, and owns her status as being a complete bitch. And the writers don't let that ruin the character, because you don't need to know anything about Sylvanas, because she's an undead character who kicks ass and makes you invested when she tells other characters, fuck you, we're doing my plan because we're winning this. And it's those characters, it's characters that pull you along on a story, that really invest you into it.
Do you think then that the only way in which we can decide on what a character is like is how they interact or how they react to events going on in the story? So does the
No,
story determine what a character can be?
no. A character will be whatever is required. Any character can work given the story, the circumstance, the media, the writers, whatever. Anything can. There are no bad ideas when it comes to creating a character, because, well, there are no bad ideas when it comes to being a person. You can only have bad characters if you write one character, but you've done a complete 180. Special shout out to Steven Universe and almost every fucking character. Jesus Christ. But I'm not going on about that today. But characters that were made with an intent in mind and are written with that intent, but without the writer realizing that they've completely missed it. I can only pull onto Steven Universe for an easy example. Lapis Lazuli was a character written in that show to be an abuse victim. That was the idea the writers were going for. However, in every single scene that was supposed to make Lazuli appear as the victim, it did the opposite. It enforced that she was the abuser. However, the writer or the executive producer was not aware of this, and so continued to write Lazuli as though she was the victim rather than the abuser, and that was what had ruined the character, because no one could look at that and go, that's a good character. They could only look at Lazuli and go, what the fuck is this creature doing outside of a prison? Just because it wasn't handled well. Characters and story elements will never be done wrong unless a writer just fucks them up. There are many characters which people love to absolute insane degrees, but another person will find completely abhorrent. It's just a case of making sure a character doesn't cross a moral event horizon or just become a wishy-washy vector for a story. If a character is simply whatever the writers need every week and their personality changes, no one gives a shit, because the character isn't there. They're just a vector. That can work in some instances, but it's only if the writer has certain elements in it. Subnautica Below Zero can't work in other medias because the characters, the story, and the world are not designed for those other medias. You would have to rechange almost the entire game to make it for that. So it's moments like those, trying not to force something to be what it isn't, and trying not to force a character to be who they aren't. We kind of just need to see how they go and see which ones work and which ones just fold.
Do you think, this is just one last question about characters, do you think it would be good for characters to start off as ambiguous, and when the story progresses further on, they learn about certain things, and that helps them to sort of understand themselves as like characters and how they can choose to interact and react to the environment and the story that they're in?
Well, that's what a character arc is. You have a character that starts out a certain way, and the story is designed to make them a completely different character, to test their morals, to change what they believe, to have them interact with other players and change their beliefs. That's what the story is meant to do. I'm going to go on to Below Zero because we're on this topic. Robin at the start is very sure of herself, very confident that she knows her sister, knows that this was all a lie and expects some big reveal that it was the evil corporation all along. But when she finds the truth, it shatters everything she knows. Her sister blew it up because she was protecting her friends, and her own death really was her own negligence. She interacts with Alan and has to explain these basic fundamental elements of humanity, but also learns more that about the precursors, and her interactions with Alan almost make her more realistic in the fact of there are going to be certain groups and elements which you just can't control and you have to just let play out.
Hmm.
Ellen talks with Maida where she gains in confidence. You see her sure of herself that she knows what she's doing and that she knows her sister.
Hmm.
But when she interacts with Maida and learns the truth from Maida, she learns that Sam did it of her own volition. There was no hand played, and so Robin changes to accommodate this. She is more willing to accept differences in not only herself but in others. She's more willing to see how people can really change when you don't speak to them, and almost resigns herself to finding out whatever she can to help others understand what they don't.
Hmm.
It's almost a sombering story. You see this character go from gung ho and ready to face the world to realizing that they know nothing, and that there's so much more that they have to learn and have to know before they're ready to go completely forward with their life.
Hmm.
And I think that's a good story to tell, because so many times people are just told that they need to be this perfect person and never do any wrong and be able to judge everything perfectly, but no one can do that.
Hmm.
Everyone will learn and adapt and develop skills and ideas at different points in their lives.
Hmm.
And acknowledging that is important.
Hmm. Okay. Shall we go on to the music now? The soundtrack to this game.
Yes,
Um,
the music in this game is great.
yep, the music is absolutely wonderful. The soundtrack of to this game was made by a guy named Ben Prunty. He was the person who composed the soundtrack to this game. Um, it's very the soundtrack is very fascinating, and I've put here in my notes about Subnautica Below Zero. Um, I can describe the soundtrack, which I've put here, as like you know the type of music that they would often play in movie scenes if they're like defusing a bomb or something. You know, like
Yeah,
really like tense, like dramatic kind of percussive music. There's like the soundtrack is kind of like a blend of that with kind of electronic kind of ambiances, particularly in dramatic points, like dramatic scenes when the tension is really high, and there's also a mixture of I'm going to use Daniel Rosenfield in this example, the person who wrote the Minecraft soundtrack. Uh, his you know that very sort of percussive, like very sort of I can't describe it, like very electronically produced, very ethereal, kind of very blocky, uh, very spacious kind of soundtrack.
sort of 8-bit, but more.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Yeah,
Um, there's a lot of the soundtrack and the differences in the different colors and the different tones and the percussiveness of the soundtrack and stuff. Um, it really kind of is very effective at describing the mystery and the unknown sort of magical depths of the ocean. This idea that the ocean is full of wondrous plants and creatures and mini
dangerous.
caves and yeah, and everything like different kind of little jewels and different surprises that 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 Robin finds in the ocean, and the music and this idea of this sort of thought provoking, quite meditative kind of soundtrack helps the players to have the frame of mind of, okay, I'm in this environment, I'm going to explore it, and I'm going to see what sort of things I can find, learn about the different things that I can find, um, go through different parts of the ocean and different parts of the land to see sort of what types of rock or what types of caves or plants or creatures there are and everything, and the different lighting as well. I think the lighting and the music really do complement each other in Subnautica Below Zero. Like the absolute sort of the diversity of the different lighting tones in Subnautica Below Zero with the differences in sort of how the soundtrack is played. So sometimes there is like electronic ambiences, sometimes there's dramatic, like very tense sort of orchestral soundtracks, and there's also a large expanse of Daniel Rosenfield type music and stuff. I think the two of them really do help the player to kind of understand that the ocean that they're in is a wondrous, vast, mysterious place with lots of different plants and different types of rock that they can look at and different things that they can admire whilst having different tasks and missions in their minds and stuff. I think the music really does help to kind of to kind of um, draw the player into this world and to help them to put on their sort of exploring hats and to try and see sort of what different things they might find or the different surprises that might appear around corners and everything. Um, Having said that, do you think any other style or genre could fit just as well in Subnautica Below Zero, or do you think the soundtrack is absolutely flawless and very effective at describing the mysteries of the ocean? Let's say, for
I mean,
example, you took the really dramatic, really overbearing, dark orchestral music that you might find in games like Code Vein and put it into something like Subnautica Below Zero. Do you think it would have the same effect? Do you think it would be just as effective at sort of illustrating the mysteries of the ocean?
I can't really talk about too much on the uh, music just because I don't analyze music myself.
Hmm.
But if you wanted to do it for swap Code Vein and Subnautica, then no, it wouldn't work because they're both designed for their certain genres in mind. Subnautica's music, I get the feeling and impression that it's more about making the world seem bigger. The music is quite wide, it's spaced out,
Hmm.
it's surround. It makes it feel as though there is no one source of music, it's just the natural sound of the ocean you hear. But that's dropped a lot when you go into these dangerous areas or you have dangerous creatures and you hear the music lower itself down into an almost quiet whisper, and you can hear all the sounds of the creatures and the monsters and the vehicles around you
Hmm.
almost screaming at you in their volume. But compare that to Code Vein, which is quite a loud, bombastic music. It's less ambience like Subnautica and more fight music. It's designed to pump you up, designed to make you feel as though it's your last hurrah and you're going to go down kicking and screaming, pulling everything around you down with you. Whereas Subnautica is more sort of open. It gives you the feel of this world is open and free and you can go and do whatever the fuck you want
Hmm.
and nothing can judge you. And you can also even hear it that there are some slight, almost robotic or um, 8-bit sort of twings in them, just as like little accents to the already great orchestral music, but it almost sort of brings to light the architects, how they're completely robotic and their music may very well be this sort of robotic feel that we need. So it's a little hint I noticed, but it's not too major and doesn't enjoy it any less. It's music that I wouldn't listen to when I'm like watching a movie or something, but it's definitely something I would like to listen to when I'm just sitting down relaxing, because it has that sort of let your mind just wander and just go. So I think it sort of fits those themes a lot more.
Yeah, I have to say the soundtrack is definitely one of the greatest things about Subnautica Below Zero. It's not a soundtrack that completely diverges away from what the actual game has to offer visually and in terms of the plot as well. I think the music really does match sort of the overall feel of the game very effectively. I think Ben Prunty has done a very good job at composing the soundtrack and making sure that the players or the people watching the game can view this game as not just a game that tells you to go, okay, you need to do this, now you need to do this, and now you need to go here, and now you need to complete this mission and stuff. But it's also a soundtrack that basically just says in musical format, right, you're the player or you're watching this, okay? You can I'm gonna here's the ocean, here's this vast expanse of land. Now go and explore. Just go and just explore the different caves and the different plants and the different creatures that you might find, and and just look at the 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 amount of detail that the video game designers have put into this game and everything. And whilst we're doing that, we're going to have this lovely sort of blocky, percussive soundtrack going on in the background to help you sort of. It's not really a soundtrack, like you said, that you would watch on a TV show or something that you listen to in the radio or something for you to sing along to. But it's more of like a relaxing, ambient sound world kind of
Yeah,
soundtrack.
I
It
find that most obvious in the safe shallows or the safer areas where the music sort of has that very nice. It's designed to make you feel safe compared to areas, especially in the original, like the lava zone or the crystal caves, where they're incredibly dangerous. The music drops and it's almost just the ambient and nothing else. But yeah, I find it a lot like meditation music, where it's just music where you can breathe and just let yourself relax without having any worries.
it's very therapeutic in a way with the
Yeah,
soundtrack. It's but it's not so therapeutic that the player feels as though, okay, I'm in this ocean, but I can take my time and stuff to well, it's a it's complicated because you do have some tasks and missions that you need to complete within the game because it's a video game and game is in video game. So there has to be like a mission type sort of mission objective behind the game to help the player to make the game have more of a story to it. But it's not a type of game that makes the player sort of feel sort of just completely relaxed as if, oh, it's just a game about exploring the world and stuff. But it's I think the soundtrack helps the player to understand that yes, they're in this very therapeutic, meditative state of mind, and this with this lovely sort of laid out kind of very charming looking plants and rocks and environment and everything. But even though they're in this meditative landscape, they've got some tasks to do, and the music helps them to kind of. When I described the music as thought provoking, I meant that the music helps the player to think a bit more about their environment, think what's around them, think about what they have to do, think about what kind of interactions with characters that they have in mind, and everything, and that helps them to progress onward through the game. I think Ben Prodi has done a very good job with composing the soundtrack. It's very
oh,
effective.
definitely.
Um, So we've now come to the point in the live stream where I only have two more questions left to ask about this game. Um, One of which is the quality assurance, which is the last sort of video game element when you're analyzing video games. So we've touched upon the world, story, characters, music, visuals. Though we may sort of go back and sort of there may be
Yeah.
some extra points that you might have about visuals and the video game design aspect to this game. But in terms of quality assurance, in other words, the controls, obviously I'm not playing the game, but um, do you have any feedback or any thoughts or any comments you'd like to make about the handling of the controls in Subnautica Below Zero?
It's a lot like the original. It's extremely smooth, and the team
Mm,
clearly knows what they're doing. Like that's something I quite enjoy about this, is that Unknown Worlds are not new faces in game development. They made a lot of first-person shooters, and so they know their controls and how it handles very well in first
mm,
person. And that you can really tell in Subnautica by, yeah, the transitioning when moving is not the smoothest, but that's mostly due to the amount of stuff gets loaded in, and that's less a problem that can be solved and more of a problem you just kind of have to pull up with,
mm,
with system constraints. But in terms of the controls, triggers react well, D-pad reacts well, all the buttons are perfectly matched. It's a little weird with how Y is your jump and item switch and A is your interact, but that's kind
mm,
of just a me problem. But other than that, it works pretty well.
mm.
There's not many issues I can say about the controls because a lot of games, especially nowadays, are built with good control sets in mind. Players know what they want, and
Mm,
developers know what that is as well.
mm.
So they all just flow together pretty easily.
Do you have anything else you'd like to say about the design to this game, like in terms of video game designing? So textures, lighting, like any more comments you'd like to
The
make about the
game,
lighting?
Subnautica, just the series in general, is not a serious game. It has a incredibly stylized art style that almost bends reality and colors and what you would think real.
Mm,
But it gets away with it because it looks fun. It's fun to look with, or rather fun to look at. The characters aren't overstaying their welcome. The designs are interesting and everything looks fascinating and alien, which is what it should, but without looking creepy. The lighting is well. They went through a few different rendering styles and a few different ways to render it and came to a really clean, polished version compared to especially early Subnautica Access that I think works with the game engine and the game itself really well. You can see all the light rays and how it interacts. The water feels realistic and it feels like it's actually water. All the worlds and the biomes look as though they would be real above land and below.
mm,
And most of the time, you're just kind of there for the ride, which is a good concept for a game.
mm,
I think a lot of players, and myself especially, like games where you don't have to take the lead role 100% of the time. You can
mm,
just meander through at your own pace without any kind of worries. It's kind of what draws people into Minecraft as well. It's an open world where there's a story. It's not a required story, but it's there if you want to do it. But you can just meander through your own pace and do a few story elements to get the unlocks. You never have to finish it.
mm,
The minute you get your final upgrades, you can basically just do whatever you want. Once you can go to the deepest biome, the world is fully yours to explore. You can go to any past biome, you can unlock any upgrade, you can find any secret, because it's not required, but it's not required to finish it either. And I
mm,
think I like that about the game. It lets you have that choice of, do you want to follow the story? No? Okay then, here's a gorgeous looking landscape with hundreds of creatures and flora and millions of ways to try new things. and here's a way that you can do all of it and just go. And so I think that serves in its favour, where players who are interested in the story and characters get their fun, but players who just prefer to meander around, collect resources, and build can also just have their fun.
Yeah, I think visually, this game is very interesting to look at visually. Um, I think it's definitely one of the many features about mainstream games is this is this is this idea that the visuals and the environment of the game have to follow a certain style by the video game editors and stuff. It's
Hmm.
it's 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 realistic, but it's not too so realistic enough that it's you're literally just looking at real life. Like it has a sense of originality to it. It has a sense of style to it.
Yeah,
It's it's just the way that the designers have focused really carefully on getting very tiny details into the rocks, into the sand, into the plants, uh, into the different lighting and the different sizes of the lighting, the light that the bright white natural light that players can see above the surface of the water. Um, just the way the waves move across the surface and everything. All of that is very realistic, and all of that is very sort of it's a very fine piece of work trying to focus on tiny details within a game. But like I said, it's not too realistic so that it's basically just you know you're playing you're playing basically a video of a game.
it's
It's
not
literally
Call of
like a
Duty where
video.
they mess with the guns.
Yeah. It has a style to it. It's basically the main overarching point. It has a style, but it's pulled off in a very realistic kind of for a very realistic kind of lens. There's an element of realism to it with the amount of detail that they've put into everything. Um, Yeah, I think visually it is saying that from a non-video game designing perspective. Visually, it's a very well thought out piece of work that the designers have done. Um, so we're down to the very final question about this game, and it's essentially been sort of the overarching question of this game. Do you think Subnautica Below Zero is a good game? Now, I think I think Subnautica Below Zero, when comparing it to that of its predecessor, Subnautica, I think I think there's a lot of elements and features about this game that make Subnautica a very lovable uh, piece of media to look at and to get involved with and to play and everything. Uh, in terms of the world, in terms of the visually, like I've just said, it's very detailed and very effective. It's not quite realistic because it has a style to it, but that concentration on making sure that all the rocks and all the plants and all the sand is presented very well, and a lot of concentration has been put into different design elements of this game. All of that has been pulled off very well. I think in terms of the stories and characters, I think it's a matter of debate. I am inclined to believe it's a debate between sort of what the player or the viewer can define as an engaging story or as a very strong, good set of characters. Um, I think in terms of the story, story wise, there's a lot to um, the story. there's a lot that can be said about the story. Um, it's it's in terms of sort of what the player or the viewer might might admire about the story, whether it's exploring different parts of the ocean and land that helps them to be engaged with the story a lot more. And some people might think actually this exploration aspect of the game kind of misleads the player when they're trying to figure out what sort of missions or tasks they need to complete to carry the story onwards. I think the music by Ben Prundy is very very good. It's very effective at kind of illustrating sort of the mysteries of the world and the mysteries of the landscape and the environment that the designers have created themselves. I think, well, I can't really say much about the controls, but having heard from what you said and what I've read online, the controls are seem to be running very smoothly and are very good. Um, I think I've covered all of the points I've mentioned. Yeah, world, visuals, story, character, music, controls. Yeah, I think Subnautica is deserving of its popularity. I think Subnautica Below Zero might need a bit more time for players and viewers to learn to love it and to admire it as a video game. Um, it will take time for them to kind of uh, once they've played the game to try and figure out what they've just seen, what they've learnt about from the characters and everything, and from that kind of information, they can then learn to love sort of the story and the characters and everything. But well, what do you think, Spike, about Subnautica Below Zero in comparison to Subnautica? Do you think?
Well, it's difficult to judge because Subnautica Below Zero is it's a fine game. It's not the greatest one ever made, and it's not the
No,
worst.
no.
I think the story and the fact that it was changed so late in development hammered that a bit. So I can't really speak too much about what I would want because, to be honest, I don't know what the original story would have been
Mm.
once it was finished. It may have been more engaging, it may not have been. We will never know anymore. Um, the visuals are fine. I like this stylized look. I want more games to do it. I don't want more Call of Duty games where they're so set in realism and real life that it's just a slog to go through.
Mm.
The most popular mode in those games are the modes that aren't based in reality. They let players just do whatever the fuck they want. And more games need that. We need players to be able to look and just explore. Giving them a sandbox to do that while telling an engaging story is great for any game.
Mm.
Below Zero, however, fucked up on one thing. It's too small. The biomes are not as diverse as they should have been from the original. There are not as many enemies or threats as there were in the original. The story itself is, as I mentioned, a bit haphazard, mostly because it was changed last minute. Um, So I think that there are some elements that the crew could have done better. The world needed to be bigger. The story needed to be a bit more patched together and a bit more polished. But that's, like I said, scraps. However, in terms of rendering, the world design, the creature design, it's all a step up. Everything is in so much more detail, and the finer tools that the crew has actually learned from doing these two games is incredible, and I hope that they do a third one, taking on feedback from from Below Zero and the original Subnautica, and making something that is truly perfect in the series. But I don't have any complaints. Subnautica itself has always been a silly, over-the-top game that is designed to just let you explore in this strange world with a story basically haphazardly thrown at it.
Mm.
I like that they gave more characters in Below Zero. I like that we get to see them interact. I like how they designed all the tools and the bases and gave players more freedom to do what they want in this game. But I think they needed to change some things.
Mm.
The fragments are haphazard and don't spawn often, so it can be a slog and grind to get the necessary tools that you need. The world is way too small, and it lines itself with just not enough in it and too much space.
Mm.
There are about 3 major biomes that you will actually be able to go into and know off by heart, and that is the purple vents, the thermal vents, and the lily pads. Those are the 3 biggest biomes, and they are about half of the biomes, because then you have the kelp forest that is spread around, the safe shallows which are also spread around, the above the 3 above land areas which are all story related and required to go to, and then you have the 2 crystal areas. Compared to Subnautica standard, which had jelly shrooms, the kelps, the grassy plateau, the safe shallows, crash ship, crag zone. Holy shit, they just kept coming. This game fell in that. It needed just a bit more diversity in it.
Mm.
But the creatures, for what you could see and for what you could actually get to in the game, are way more advanced and adventurous than you would ever think. They added
Mm.
in old concepts that either didn't fit in the original and could fit in this game, or they added in completely new creatures from old concept art. This game basically tied in a lot of what people wanted in the first game and kind of stitched it together, which I think was what made it feel so small. It just didn't have enough pieces to make a full puzzle.
Mm.
But it serves its theme and story well. I'm
Mm.
adamant on the theme that Subnautica Below Zero is not a game about um, being alone. It's a game about making connections, dealing with loss, and not only that, I think it's found family.
Mm.
Robin finds friends and almost a sort of second family in Alan and Maida. You see from the way she interacts, she likes talking with them. Uh, the ending as well, which I'm going to spoil, so skip like now, has Robin travel with Alan, and the last lines you hear Alan say is, "With you, I can face anything," and it's sort of reminiscent of their relationship. Throughout the whole game, they've been at each other's ends, but when it really counts, they know the other has their back, and
Mm.
that's quite a strong message people need to hear. That real friends, people who you can really trust, will stick by you and pull you out if they need to.
Mm.
And so I think that's something we've been needing a lot more.
Mm.
So while this game wasn't great, it was good for what it needed to be. I'd give it about a C plus to a B minus. It wasn't great. It could have been better, but it wasn't bad.
That being said, if they did produce a third game in the Subnautica series, what are you hoping for them to include, or for them to change? Um,
Gay characters, no. um, I want them to add in more characters. I can't really. It's difficult to say because you don't really know until you get it.
hmm.
I want the world to be at least of a similar size to the first one. I would like them to have raised the fragments that it's not a slog to go through. I would like to see a few more designs and more creatures that we can actually have. This game almost felt like a prequel where it's way too safe, and it's almost baby's first step into the series, which I think is a step back from what the original was, where it was way more dangerous and difficult to tell just what was threatening and what wasn't.
Hmm.
So I'd like them to bring back a few of those, but having these stories being told this way about being alone and the fear it can provide, and dealing with grief. I think they're good stories. They just need a bit of polish,
Hmm.
but I can see where they're getting better. The original story was just mute guy goes through the world trying to survive, finds cure, leaves. Whereas this one had someone investigate the loss of their family, investigate the causes of their death, acknowledge that, accept it, and move on, and then build a friendship with a person they never thought they'd meet, and someone who has vastly different interests than them. That they build a relationship to help each other, and at the end, they both have each other's back in a way that was never going to be apparent in the start.
Hmm.
So I can see them improving. I just think they need a bit more polish.
Hmm. I think with me, I think um, obviously I could say a lot about what the video game designers and writers could do to improve. Um, uh, there's always room for improvement when it comes to video games, or in fact any sort of artistic idiom. Um, I think that I think I'm inclined to believe that it should be up to the video game designers, and I think it's more interesting if the video game designers work it out for themselves, sort of what the viewers or players might be expecting in the third game, and to have them figure it out for themselves. I think Subnautica Below Zero, a lot of people can make comments and make their opinions known about this game and the different elements and features of the game, and then writers and designers can take those elements and sort of incorporate it back into the third game. So I think I'm inclined to believe that there's something interesting about just leaving it up to the people actually creating these games to actually decide for themselves what they think might be a turning point for a series like Subnautica. What do you think about that? Do you think it should just be left to the video game creators
Yeah,
to decide for themselves what they think might be a good
of
step
course,
forward from Subnautica
of
Below
course.
Zero? Or do you think the public is completely in control and can decide sort of what they can and can't include in the next few games
No,
or whatever?
that's a stupid assertion. Fans and people in the public love to believe that they know what is best, that they can make something better than professionals who have been doing it for years, and that is just not true. The crew and the developers have been making progress, and this is something Subnautica compared to their previous title, Natural Selection, is like night and fucking day. They are almost completely different. So seeing them go from one to the other and seeing that journey of how they've changed their development and how they've traversed into a new sort of genre is inspiring. It's fascinating to see, and Below Zero is, I think, another step in their path to going down this route. I
Hmm.
want to see more from these developers. I want them to improve on their writing. I want them to improve on their development of this genre because they've shown such promise that letting people in the public dictate what they should do is ridiculous. They should look for people who have issues and fix them. They should look for people who are criticizing their work and going, how can we make it better? Not, hey, what do you want?
Hmm.
Because that's just asking for disaster.
And lots of people have different see the game very differently as well, so it's very difficult to try and keep up with people's requests or trying to meet what people would define as better for a series or for a video game or anything. Like different people respond to different things very differently with different reactions and different perspectives. And and so it can be very difficult for the people creating different things, whether it be video game, whether it be music or writing or or whatever it is. You know, it's very
Yeah,
difficult for content creators to actually sort of come up with um, changes to games or whatever they're working on their different projects to try and meet the standards of the people viewing their content or for the people participating in their content. So the people playing their video games, for example. You can have a whole entire debate on that front. Do you have any lasting thoughts at all about Subnautica Below Zero, or anything?
Not really. I've kind of said everything I wanted to say.
Yeah. Do you think this game has a chance of becoming successful?
I think it already has.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, this game is successful. It will be successful
Hmm.
because the way it designed itself and the way that the creators knew just what their audience wanted and wanted to see more of was good, and it shows just how. And even then, the developers, especially for this game, are really active in their Discord and their forums. They are willing to talk to players and potential investors. They want to have feedback on their work, and I think that shows a level of not only respect but of actual growth, because there are a lot of people nowadays that just say fuck it to the very concept of criticism. They want to just be told that their work is amazing and without flaw,
Hmm.
and that's just not true. So I think it's quite uplifting to see these developers go, no, tell us how we fucked up and what we need and what we want, and we will decide.
Hmm. That's
But
very
yeah,
that's very that's very true. I completely agree with that. Okay, so we've now come to the end of our live stream
yes.
analysis and discussion on Subnautica Below Zero. We're hopefully going to review some more games, to do more sort of analysis dissection games like these. We've got Hollow Knight sort of. We're planning on doing a Hollow Knight video perhaps later on, in
Eventually,
time.
Scarlet Nexus comes out on the 25th, so priorities.
Scarlet Nexus as well, other such games as well, and everything, and do
We
some.
have a list.
Yeah, we do have a list. We are working on a very large list of games to review. That's sort of being concocted in the works. But yeah, thank you for watching this. Thank you for watching this live. If you're watching this on either on live stream or you're listening to this on podcast, and we will hopefully see you at some point in the future. Bye.
Yeah. See you guys. Thanks for joining us.